I should have known the moment she stopped crying that I'd already lost everything. My wife didn't scream when she found out. She didn't throw things or curse my name to the heavens like they do in the movies. Amara just looked at me, really looked at me, with those dark, penetrating eyes that had once promised me forever. And in that single glance, I watched 30 years of love calcify into something cold and immovable. That look didn't just end my marriage. It ended the man I thought I was. My name is Jonathan Pierce, and at 62 years old, I'm the founder and CEO of Pierce Innovations, a tech conglomerate worth just north of $4 billion. We're headquartered in downtown Seattle, occupying 12 floors of the Columbia Center with views that stretch from Elliott Bay to the Cascade Mountains. I've been profiled in Forbes, interviewed on CNBC, invited to speak at Stanford and MIT. I've shaken hands with 3 sitting presidents, but none of that, not a single achievement in my carefully constructed empire, prepared me for the moment my wife discovered I'd been living a double life for the past 7 years. It was a Tuesday in early October when everything unraveled. The Pacific Northwest was doing its seasonal shift from the golden warmth of summer into the gray embrace of autumn. And I remember the rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Medina estate, as if the sky itself was angry with me. Amara and I had lived in that house for 23 years, ever since Pierce Innovations went public and turned us from comfortable to obscenely wealthy. The property sat on 2 acres overlooking Lake Washington, with a private dock, a greenhouse Amara had designed herself, and enough rooms that we could go days without crossing paths, which looking back should have been the first warning sign. I just returned from what I'd told Amara was a business trip to San Francisco. In reality, I'd been in Portland, just 3 hours south, staying at the Heathman Hotel with Melissa Chen, the woman who'd become my other life. Melissa was 39, a brilliant biochemist I'd met at a conference in Vancouver 6 years earlier, and what started as intellectual attraction had morphed into something I couldn't seem to walk away from, no matter how many times I promised myself I would. The affair had its own ecosystem: separate credit cards, a burner phone, a small condo I'd purchased under an LLC in Portland's Pearl District. I'd convinced myself I was managing it all with surgical precision. I'd even developed a sixth sense of pride in my ability to compartmentalize, to keep both worlds spinning without collision. What arrogance! What spectacular, devastating arrogance! Amara Pierce, born Amara Okonkwo in Lagos, Nigeria, raised in Houston after her parents immigrated when she was 8, was a force of nature disguised as elegant restraint. At 58, she still turned heads with her statuesque frame, her skin the color of rich mahogany, her natural hair worn in elaborate styles that took hours to create. She'd been a civil rights attorney before we had children, the kind who took on police departments and won. She'd given up her practice when our twins were born, transitioning into nonprofit work, sitting on boards, organizing fundraisers, mentoring young Black lawyers. Everyone who knew Amara respected her. Most people were a little afraid of her too, in that good way that comes from recognizing someone who doesn't compromise their principles. We'd met in 1993 at a Seattle Urban League gala. I was 31, still climbing, hungry to prove that a Black man from Tacoma's hilltop neighborhood could build something lasting in an industry that barely had room for us. She was 27, fierce and beautiful, wearing a red dress I can still picture perfectly. We talked for 4 hours that night about everything from code architecture to Toni Morrison, from systemic racism and venture capital to her mother's recipe for jollof rice. I proposed 6 months later on the observation deck of the Space Needle, both of us laughing at the tourist cliche of it all. For 23 years, we built a good life. Our twins, Marcus and Maya, were born in 1995. Marcus now worked in sustainable architecture in Denver, married to a wonderful woman named Keisha, with a baby girl of his own. Maya was finishing her residency in pediatric oncology at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, engaged to another doctor, planning a wedding for next summer. We'd done well, Amara and I. We'd created good humans who contributed to the world. We'd navigated the unique pressures of being a high-profile Black family in a predominantly white social sphere. We'd survived the scrutiny, the microaggressions, the isolation that comes with wealth and visibility. Or at least, I thought we'd survived it together. Before I continue, if you're invested in where this is going, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. The truth is, the affair started during a dark period I'd never properly shared with Amara. In 2017, Pierce Innovations had been rocked by a scandal. One of our executives had been embezzling funds and covering it up with falsified reports. The media circus was brutal, and even though I hadn't been involved, my name got dragged through every headline. Billionaire CEO's company in chaos. Questions mount about Pierce's oversight. It didn't matter that I'd been the one to discover the theft and report it. In the court of public opinion, especially for a black CEO in tech, there's no presumption of innocence. There's just suspicion that maybe somehow you were always the wrong kind of person for this role. I started drinking more, sleeping less, snapping at people. Amara tried to reach me, tried to get me to open up, but I'd learned early in life that showing vulnerability was dangerous. My father, a Boeing machinist who drank away his pain and died of a heart attack at 51, had taught me that a man handles his problems alone. So I shut Amara out and told myself I was protecting her from my stress. That's when I met Melissa at the Vancouver Biotech Conference. She was presenting research on cellular regeneration, and I'd been invited to speak about investing in medical technology. We ended up in the hotel bar after the panels ended, and she asked questions about my work that showed genuine interest rather than the usual networking veneer. She was Chinese American, raised in Sacramento, and she had this direct, no-nonsense way of speaking that felt refreshing after years of corporate doublespeak. The first time I kissed her, we were in her hotel room at 2 in the morning, both of us slightly drunk, and I remember the jolt of it. Not just the physical spark, but the psychological rush of being someone new. With Melissa, I wasn't the scandal-plagued CEO or the husband who couldn't fix his wife's disappointment in him. I was just Jonathan, flawed and human, allowed to be uncertain. I told myself it was temporary, a pressure valve, a midlife crisis I'd work through and then return to my real life. But temporary became 6 months, then a year, then 2. Melissa never pushed for more than I could give. She had her own life, her own career at a research facility in Portland. She said she understood the constraints. Looking back, I think she was as trapped in the fantasy as I was. The borrowed moments, the hotel rooms, the manufactured privacy. It was easier than dealing with real life. The money made it all possible, of course. That's what wealth does. It doesn't just buy things. It buys secrecy, convenience, distance from consequences. I had assistants who booked travel without asking questions, accountants who managed discrete accounts, a lifestyle so complex that a few extra expenses disappeared into the noise. I paid for everything with cash or with credit cards in my assistant's name. I was meticulous, but not meticulous enough. The unraveling started with my brother, of all people. Devin Pierce was 5 years younger than me, a high school history teacher in Tacoma who'd always resented my success. We'd grown up in the same cramped house on South Ainsworth Avenue, watched the same father slowly destroy himself. But we'd taken opposite paths. I'd clawed my way out through scholarships and 80-hour work weeks. Devin had stayed teaching at Lincoln High School, living in a modest house in the same neighborhood where we'd grown up, bitter about the opportunities he believed he'd been denied. We weren't close, maybe exchanged awkward pleasantries at family gatherings a few times a year, but in late September, Devin showed up at my office unannounced. My assistant tried to stop him, but he pushed past her and into my corner office on the 42nd floor, looking angry and righteous in a way that immediately put me on edge. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes, I replied, not standing up from my desk. It was a power move I'd perfected over decades, remaining seated when someone entered, forcing them to look down at you. "This won't take long." Devin sat in one of the leather chairs across from my desk without being invited. "I saw you last week, in Portland, outside some fancy condo building, with a woman who definitely wasn't Amara." My blood went cold, but I kept my expression neutral. "You're mistaken." "I'm not." He leaned forward. "I was there for a teaching conference at Portland State, Thursday evening, around 7. You came out of a building on Northwest 10th holding hands with an Asian woman, laughing about something. You got into a black Tesla and drove off. Took me a second to be sure it was you, but then I thought, yeah, that's my billionaire brother." living his best life while the rest of us struggle. The bitterness in his voice was palpable, and I realized this wasn't really about the affair. This was about every resentment he'd been nursing for 40 years. What do you want, Dem? He smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. I want what's fair. I want you to remember where you came from. I want you to help fund the community programs at Lincoln that are about to get cut because the district doesn't have money. And I want you to be honest with Amara because she deserves better than whatever game you're playing. This is blackmail. This is family looking out for family, he corrected. You've got a week to think about it. After that, I can't guarantee who might accidentally hear about what I saw. He left, and I sat there for 20 minutes, my heart hammering, trying to calculate the damage. Devin was unpredictable. Sometimes he'd go years without speaking to me. Other times he'd show up demanding help or money. But I'd never seen him like this before, weaponized by righteousness. I should have come clean to Amara right then. If I'd had any courage at all, I would have driven home that afternoon and told her everything. Instead, I called Melissa and told her we needed to be more careful. I paid Devin $50,000, funneled through a donation to Lincoln High School's alumni fund, and convinced myself I'd bought time. 2 weeks later, on that rainy Tuesday in October, Amara called me while I was in a meeting. Come home, she said, her voice strange and flat. Now. I made excuses to my executives and drove the 12 miles from downtown Seattle to Medina in a fog of dread. The whole way across the 520 bridge, watching the gray water of Lake Washington churn beneath me, I knew. Somehow, I knew it was over. Amara was waiting in the living room, sitting in the leather armchair by the fireplace, the one she always claimed when she needed to think. On the coffee table in front of her was my burner phone, the one I'd been stupid enough to leave in my car's glove compartment when I took the Tesla in for service that morning. The mechanic must have found it. Maybe he recognized my name when I dropped off the car. Maybe he'd been curious, opened it, saw the messages between Melissa and me. Maybe he'd shown someone, or posted about it online, or sold the information. However it happened, Amara had the phone now, and from the rigid set of her shoulders, I knew she'd read everything. Amara, she held up one hand, stopping me. I don't want to hear your voice right now. I can barely stand to look at you. I stood there in my Tom Ford suit, rain dripping onto the hardwood floor, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. 7 years, she said, her voice absolutely steady. I've been counting while I've been sitting here. 7 years of business trips. 7 years of lies. You've been with this woman for 7 years, Jonathan. It's not what you think. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Do not insult me by pretending this is anything other than what it is. I read the messages, all of them. Can't wait to see you this weekend. Portland feels like home when we're together. That's what you wrote to her. 3 weeks ago. I had no defense. Every word she quoted was true. I stood there, mute and pathetic, while the woman I'd promised forever systematically dismantled my lies. I keep trying to understand, Amara continued, and now I could hear the tremor underneath the control. I keep going through our life, trying to find the moment when I became insufficient. Was it after the scandal? Was it when the kids left for college? Or was I never enough for you? Was it always just a matter of time before you went looking for something younger, newer, more exciting? It had nothing to do with you. She laughed, and it was a terrible sound. Of course it had to do with me. I'm your wife, or I was. She stood up, and I noticed for the first time that she was dressed carefully. A navy dress, heels, her hair in a neat bun. She'd prepared for this confrontation like it was a court appearance. I've already spoken to Rachel Thornton. She's taking my case. Rachel Thornton was the most feared divorce attorney in Seattle, known for absolutely eviscerating wealthy husbands in settlements. Amara, please, we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can work through 7 years of betrayal. Work through you building an entire second life with another woman? No, Jonathan, we can't. She picked up her purse from the chair. I'm staying at the Four Seasons downtown tonight. My attorney will be in touch with yours tomorrow. I want you to understand something clearly. I'm not going to make this easy for you. I'm going to fight for every asset, every property, every dollar. Not because I need the money, but because I need you to feel what you've done. I need there to be consequences." She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. That's when she gave me the look, the one I mentioned at the beginning of this story. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hatred. It was worse. It was complete and total indifference. Like I'd become something she needed to step around on her way to somewhere more important. "I really loved you," she said quietly. "For 30 years, I loved you with everything I had. I defended you, supported you, believed in you even when the world didn't. And you threw it away for hotel rooms and secret phone calls. I hope she was worth it, Jonathan. I really do." Then she left, and I was alone in our enormous, empty house, listening to the rain and finally understanding what I'd destroyed. If this story is resonating with you, please hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Your support means everything. The next 72 hours were a blur of lawyers, damage control, and steadily mounting panic. My attorney, Leonard Shapiro, who'd been with me since the early days of Pierce Innovations, laid out the situation with brutal clarity. "Washington is a community property state," he said in his downtown office, overlooking Pike Place Market. "Whatever was acquired during the marriage gets split 50-50 unless you have a prenup, which you don't. We're talking about your house in Medina, the vacation property in Maui, the investment portfolios. Half of Pierce Innovations' value as of today. Rachel Thornton is going to push for $2 billion, minimum." I felt sick, not because of the money, though $2 billion was a staggering sum even for me, but because of what it represented. Amara wasn't just divorcing me. She was systematically dismantling everything we'd built, and she had every legal right to do it. "Can we fight it?" I asked. Leonard gave me a look of pure exasperation. "You had a 7-year affair, Jonathan. You maintained a secret apartment. You have documented text messages professing love to another woman. Amara's attorney is going to paint you as a deceitful, manipulative husband who squandered marital trust. No judge in King County is going to be sympathetic to you. Our best option is to negotiate a settlement that doesn't completely destroy you." But Amara wasn't interested in negotiating. Over the next 3 weeks, as October turned cold and the Seattle streets filled with fallen leaves, she orchestrated a legal assault that was both brilliant and merciless. She leaked the affair to the press, not directly, but through carefully timed conversations with people she knew would talk. By mid-November, the story was everywhere. Billionaire CEO's marriage crumbles amid 7-year affair. Jonathan Pierce's secret life. How Seattle's tech titan deceived his wife. Amara Pierce files for divorce, seeks half of $4 billion fortune. The coverage was savage, and it exposed something I'd spent my whole life trying to ignore. Society loves a successful black man until he shows himself to be flawed. And then the fall is twice as hard. The same publications that had celebrated my business acumen now dissected my character. Think pieces appeared about wealthy men and entitlement. Old college acquaintances gave interviews about how I'd always been ambitious to the point of ruthlessness. Former employees anonymously shared stories about my demanding management style, carefully reframed to make me sound tyrannical. Pierce Innovations' board of directors called an emergency meeting. They didn't fire me, I still owned 40% of the company, but they strongly suggested I take a leave of absence while the media storm passed. My COO, Patricia Hammond, would serve as interim CEO. It was a humiliating demotion, and everyone knew it. I called Melissa, desperate for comfort, but the conversation went badly. "This is getting too public," she said from her lab in Portland. "My colleagues are starting to ask questions. Someone recognized me from a photo that got leaked online." "Jonathan, I didn't sign up for this level of exposure." "We can weather it together," I said, hating how desperate I sounded. "Once the divorce is final, we can actually be public about our relationship. No more hiding." There was a long pause. "I don't think that's what I want." "What?" "I think," she sighed, "I think we worked because we were secret. Because it was separate from real life. But real life is messy and complicated, and I'm not sure I'm equipped to be the woman who destroyed Jonathan Pierce's marriage. That's how everyone will see me. You didn't destroy anything. I made these choices. That's generous, but it doesn't change reality. I need some space, Jonathan. I need to figure out what I actually want, separate from the fantasy we've been living in. She ended the call, and I realized with dawning horror that I'd lost both women. Amara was gone, rightfully furious, and Melissa, the woman I'd risked everything for, was retreating now that our relationship had to exist in daylight. I started drinking. Not the casual scotch after work, but serious, dedicated drinking aimed at obliterating consciousness. I stayed in the Medina house even though Amara had moved out, rattling around in all that empty space, ordering food delivery and alcohol delivery, and barely leaving my bedroom. My assistant called every day until I told her to stop. My kids called, their voices tight with disappointment and confusion, and I couldn't bear to talk to them for more than a few minutes. It was Devin who showed up in mid-November and probably saved my life, even though I didn't want him to. He let himself in through the garage code, one I'd forgotten he still had from years ago, and found me passed out on the living room couch at 2 in the afternoon, surrounded by empty bottles. "Jesus, Jonathan!" He shook me awake. "Get up! Go away! Not a chance!" He hauled me to my feet with surprising strength. "You're coming with me, now!" I was too exhausted to fight. He drove me back to Tacoma in his beat-up Honda Civic to the modest house he shared with his wife Linda and their teenage daughter. Linda took one look at me and set up their guest room without comment. Over the next 5 days, they basically held me hostage, making me eat real food, confiscating my phone, forcing me to sleep at regular hours. On the third evening, sitting at their kitchen table over Linda's incredible chili, Devin finally spoke about the elephant in the room. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For threatening to expose you, for being bitter and petty and using your worst moment as leverage. That wasn't right. But you were right about Amar deserving better." "Yeah, but that wasn't my place to decide or to force your hand. I was angry about my own life and took it out on you. I've been jealous of you for decades, Jonathan. Jealous of your success, your money, the way you got out while I stayed. I told myself it was about principle, but really I just wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt." Linda put her hand on Devin's. "We talked to our pastor about it," she said gently, "about how resentment was poisoning Devin. This situation with you forced us to really examine what we'd been carrying." "I don't deserve your help," I said. "Maybe not," Devin replied, "but you're still my brother. And despite everything, I don't want to watch you destroy yourself. Dad already did that, and it didn't solve anything. It just left us without a father." That broke something open in me. I started crying, the deep, ugly crying I'd been holding back for weeks. And neither of them told me to stop. They just sat there and let me grieve. Over the next several days in Tacoma, Devin and I finally had the conversations we should have had decades ago. I told him about the pressure of being the successful one, the isolation of wealth, the way I'd built such high walls around myself that I'd forgotten how to be vulnerable with the people who mattered. He told me about the bitterness he'd carried, feeling like he'd been left behind, like my success was an implicit judgment on his choices. "You know what the worst part was?" he said one night. "Seeing you throw away something I would have killed for. A woman who genuinely loved you. A family that was solid, respect from your community. You had everything, and you treated it like it wasn't enough." He was right. That was exactly what I'd done. By the time I returned to Medina in late November, I was marginally more functional and infinitely more clear about the scale of what I destroyed. The divorce proceedings were moving forward with mechanical efficiency. Amar's attorney was indeed pushing for half of everything. $2 billion in liquid assets, the house, shared custody of future decisions regarding our adult children's inheritance. Leonard advised me to settle. "Fighting this will only make it worse," he said. "The longer it drags out, the more it costs you in legal fees, public reputation, and frankly, your mental health. Give her what she's asking for. It's fair. It's what the law says she deserves. And fighting it makes you look vindictive." I agreed to Amara's terms in early December. $2 billion transferred over a structured timeline. The Medina house would be sold, proceeds split. The Maui property would go to her. We'd establish separate trust funds for Marcus and Maya, ensuring their inheritances weren't affected by our dissolution. Amara would retain her seat on the boards of the nonprofits we jointly supported. I would issue a public statement taking full responsibility for the failure of our marriage. The statement was humiliating but necessary. I take complete responsibility for the end of my marriage to Amara Pierce. I betrayed her trust through my actions, and I deeply regret the pain I've caused her, our children, and our family. Amara is an extraordinary woman who deserves happiness and respect, neither of which I adequately provided. I wish her nothing but peace and fulfillment moving forward. The divorce was finalized just before Christmas, 30 years almost to the day after I'd proposed to her at the Space Needle. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nate, I thought that would be the end of it, the painful but final closing of a chapter. I was wrong. The real reckoning was just beginning, and it would come from a direction I'd never anticipated. It started with an email in early January from someone I'd never heard of. Diane Morrison, executive director of the Okonkwo Foundation, a nonprofit Amara had founded 15 years earlier to support young Black women pursuing careers in law and public service. The foundation was named after Amara's father, who'd been a professor of political science at Texas Southern University before his death in 2010. The email was polite but direct. Mr. Pierce, I'm reaching out regarding the foundation's financial situation. As you may know, you and Mrs. Pierce have been the primary donors since the foundation's inception. Given the divorce, we need to understand how funding will be structured moving forward. The foundation currently supports 32 law students across 14 universities, and any disruption to funding would be devastating to these young women's futures. Could we schedule a call to discuss? I'd honestly forgotten about the foundation. Amara had built and run it, and I'd written checks annually, big checks, usually $1 million or $2 million, without much involvement. It was her project, her passion. I called Diane back that afternoon. She turned out to be a sharp woman in her mid-50s, originally from Detroit, who'd been working with Amara since the foundation's early days. Mr. Pierce, I'll be direct, she said. The foundation's operating budget is $3 million annually. You and Mrs. Pierce have historically contributed $2.5 million of that, with the remainder from smaller donors. Mrs. Pierce has informed me that she's going to continue her personal contributions, about $500,000 per year, but she can no longer fund the foundation at the previous level given her changed financial circumstances. Translation, she'd just given half her fortune to the nonprofit sector through various donations, then taken the remaining wealth to completely restructure her life. She didn't have the same liquid assets to throw around. What happens if the funding gap isn't filled? I asked. We'd have to drastically scale back, Diane said. Probably cut our scholarship program by 70%. Some of these students are relying on our support to stay in school. Many of them are first-generation college students from low-income families. The impact would be immediate and devastating. I felt the weight of it settle on me. This was another consequence I hadn't considered. All the people beyond Amara who would be hurt by my selfishness. I'll cover it, I said. The full amount Amara and I used to contribute. $2 million annually, structured as a recurring donation. Send me the paperwork. There was a pause. Mr. Pierce, that's incredibly generous, but I need to be transparent with you. Mrs. Pierce specifically instructed me to make this request, knowing it would put you in an uncomfortable position. She wanted you to understand the full scope of what your actions affected. Not just her, not just your family, but entire communities of people who depended on the stability you've now disrupted. And there it was, another move in Amara's chess game. She was teaching me a lesson, making me confront every ripple effect of my choices. It was brilliant and brutal, and I couldn't even be angry about it because she was absolutely right. I donated the money. I also started paying attention to the other foundations and nonprofits Amara had supported over the years. The Seattle Urban League, Year Up, organizations supporting formerly incarcerated people re-entering society, arts programs in underserved communities. Many of them had received significant funding from the Pierces, and now half of the Pierces had her own priorities and limited bandwidth. I started writing more checks, attending more events, actually showing up instead of just transferring money. It was penance, yes, But it was also the first time in years I'd felt connected to something beyond my own ego and comfort. In February, Marcus called me from Denver. "Dad, we need to talk." My son had barely spoken to me since the affair came out. He'd sent one devastating text in November. "How could you do that to Mom? I don't understand who you are anymore." I'd responded with apologies he'd never acknowledged. "I'm listening," I said. "Maya and I have been talking. We're both furious with you. You hurt Mom in a way that's unforgivable, and you've damaged how we see you, how we see relationships, how we think about trust. That's going to take years to repair, if it even can be repaired." My chest tightened. "I understand. But," Marcus continued, "we've also been watching what you've been doing these past few months. The donations, the foundation support, showing up to community events. Devin told us about how you stayed with him, how you've been working on yourself. It's not enough to fix what you broke, but it's something. It's a start." "I don't expect forgiveness," I said. "Good, because we're not there yet. But Maya and I agreed we're willing to try to rebuild some kind of relationship with you. Not the one we had before. That's gone. But maybe something new, something more honest. We want our daughter to know her grandfather, even if he's flawed. We want Maya's future kids to have you in their lives. But that requires you to actually change, Dad. Not just perform change for the cameras, but genuinely become a better person." "I'm trying," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm really trying." "Then keep trying. And Dad, go to therapy. Real therapy, not just crisis management. You've got stuff from Grandpa, from growing up poor, from being a black man in tech, from whatever drove you to blow up your life. Deal with it." He was right. I started seeing Dr. Patricia Coleman, a black therapist in Seattle, who specialized in high-achieving professionals dealing with self-destructive patterns. Twice a week, I sat in her office and excavated all the broken parts I'd been running from. Oh, we talked about my father and the message I'd internalized that vulnerability was weakness. We talked about imposter syndrome and how success never quite felt secure because I'd grown up with nothing. We talked about the affair and what I'd really been seeking, not Melissa herself, but the feeling of being someone uncomplicated, unburdened by expectations. "You built your entire identity around achieving and providing," Dr. Coleman said during one session in March. "You equated your worth with your productivity, your wealth, your status. So when that was threatened during the scandal, you fractured. The affair was an escape into a version of yourself that didn't carry all that weight. But here's what you're learning now. You can't selectively numb. When you shut down the hard feelings, you also shut down the capacity for real connection." It was brutal work, and there were days I wanted to quit. But I kept showing up because my children were right. Performing change wasn't enough. I needed to actually transform. In April, something unexpected happened. Amara called me directly for the first time since the divorce was finalized. "Jonathan, I need your help with something," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's about the foundation." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, far enough from both our usual haunts to ensure privacy. Amara looked different, lighter somehow, despite the circumstances. She'd cut her hair into a short, natural style, and she was wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater I'd never seen before. "You look good," I said, then immediately regretted it. I had no right to comment on her appearance. But she smiled slightly. "Thank you. Freedom suits me." We sat down and she explained the situation. One of the foundation's scholarship recipients, a young woman named Jasmine Reeves from South Seattle, had been falsely accused of plagiarism in her first-year law school ethics class at Georgetown. The accusation was clearly racially motivated. The professor had targeted Jasmine based on stereotypes about black students and affirmative action. But Georgetown's administration was moving forward with disciplinary proceedings that could end Jasmine's legal career before it started. "I want to fight this," Amara said. "I want to use every resource we have to defend Jasmine, hire the best education attorneys, put pressure on Georgetown to do the right thing. But Diane is worried about the cost and the potential backlash if we lose. What do you need from me?" "Honestly, I need you to use your reputation, or what's left of it." She met my eyes directly. "You're still Jonathan Pierce, billionaire CEO. You still have connections. influence, the ability to make calls that get returned. If we're going to win this fight, we need people in power to pay attention. Will you help? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Whatever you need. Over the next 2 months, Amar and I worked together for the first time since the divorce. Not as spouses, but as allies with a common purpose. I called in favors, connecting Amara with attorneys who specialized in education discrimination cases. I reached out to influential Georgetown alumni in my network, making it clear that the case had high-profile attention. I wrote op-eds for the Washington Post and the Seattle Times about bias in academic institutions and the particular targeting of Black excellence. Amara was the strategist, methodically building the case, coordinating with Jasmine's family, preparing documentation that showed a pattern of discriminatory behavior from the professor in question. Watching her work was humbling. This was who she'd always been, this fierce advocate, and I'd been too self-absorbed to truly appreciate it. Georgetown eventually backed down, dropped the charges against Jasmine, and opened an investigation into the professor's conduct. Jasmine sent us both a video message, tears streaming down her face, thanking us for believing in her when the system hadn't. After it was over, Amar and I had dinner at a small Ethiopian restaurant in the Central District, a place we used to go to early in our marriage. "Thank you for helping," she said over shared platters of Dora Wat and injera. "You didn't have to, especially after everything." "Yes, I did," I replied, "not just because it was the right thing, but because I'm trying to figure out who I want to be now, who I should have been all along." She studied me for a long moment. "You seem different." "I hope so. I've been in therapy, working on myself, trying to understand why I destroyed the best thing in my life." Amara nodded slowly. "I've been in therapy too, trying to process 30 years of marriage ending, trying to understand my own part in how we got here." "Your part?" I was genuinely confused. "Amara, you didn't do anything wrong." "That's not entirely true." She set down her fork. "I wasn't perfect either, Jonathan. I know you were the one who had the affair, and that's on you completely. But I've been thinking about how we stopped really talking years before that, how I threw myself into nonprofit work and let our emotional intimacy fade, how I sometimes used my moral certainty as a weapon instead of trying to understand what you were going through during the scandal. We both let the marriage die before you buried it with your choices. It was generous of her to share any responsibility, though we both knew the scales weren't balanced. Still, hearing her acknowledge the complexity felt like a gift I didn't deserve. "I'm not saying we'll ever be what we were," she continued. "That's gone, Jonathan. You killed it, and I've mourned it, and I'm moving forward. But maybe, eventually, we can be something else. Civil co-parents to our adult children. Colleagues in the work we both care about. People who once loved each other and can acknowledge that without bitterness consuming everything." "I'd like that," I said quietly. "I'd like that more than you know." We didn't hug when we left the restaurant. We didn't make promises about staying in touch or having regular dinners. But something had shifted, a microscopic movement towards something that wasn't reconciliation, but wasn't total devastation either. By summer, my life had developed new rhythms. I'd officially stepped down as CEO of Pierce Innovations, transitioning to chairman of the board, while Patricia Hammond took over full leadership. It was the right move. She was brilliant, and the company needed someone without my baggage. I focused on strategic oversight and spent most of my time on philanthropic work, particularly with organizations supporting young Black professionals in tech and law. Devin and I had gotten closer. We met for breakfast every other week, sometimes talking about heavy things, sometimes just existing as brothers. He introduced me to his work at Lincoln High School, and I started funding a computer science program there, teaching a few classes myself. Being back in a classroom in Tacoma, working with kids from backgrounds like mine, felt more meaningful than any board meeting I'd ever attended. Marcus and Maya gradually let me back into their lives, though the relationship was different, more honest, less automatic affection. They asked hard questions about why I'd made the choices I'd made, and I tried to answer truthfully instead of defensively. I flew to Denver for my granddaughter's second birthday in July. I attended Maya's white coat ceremony when she officially became an attending physician in August. These weren't grand gestures of redemption. They were quiet, consistent efforts to show up and be present. Melissa and I had one final conversation in September, a year after everything fell apart. We met at a coffee shop in Portland, neutral territory, both of us nervous. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, "for my part in all this. I told myself I wasn't responsible for your marriage, that you were an adult making your own choices. But I knew you were married. I knew what we were doing would hurt people. I was selfish." "We both were," I replied. "I think we gave each other permission to avoid our real lives. But that's over now. I've started seeing someone," she said. "Someone available, someone I can actually build something with. It's nice. It's normal. It's what I should have wanted all along. I'm happy for you, genuinely." She smiled, sad but real. "I hope you find that too, Jonathan. Peace. Actual peace. Not just the absence of chaos." We parted ways, and I felt a strange sense of closure. Not because I'd stopped caring about her, but because I finally understood that what we'd had, it was never real. It was a fantasy maintained by secrecy and compartmentalization. Real love requires showing up in daylight, dealing with ordinary problems, choosing someone when it's difficult. I'd never done that with Melissa. I'd barely done it with Amara. In October, exactly 1 year after Amara discovered the affair, I did something I'd been planning for months. I sold the condo in Portland, the one I'd bought for the affair, and donated the full proceeds, nearly $800,000, to the Okonkwo Foundation. I didn't make a public announcement. I didn't tell anyone except Diane Morrison, who called me crying when the wire transfer hit their account. "This will change everything for us," she said. "We can expand to 10 more schools. We can increase scholarship amounts. Mr. Pierce, this is transformative." "It's the least I could do," I said. "That place represented the worst of who I was. I'm glad something good can come from it." I also did something more personal. I wrote letters to Amara, Marcus, and Maya, not asking for forgiveness, not making excuses, but simply taking inventory of what I'd learned over the past year. I acknowledged the specific ways I'd failed each of them. I told them what I was doing differently now and why. I made it clear I didn't expect responses, but wanted them to know I was doing the work, even when no one was watching. Marcus wrote back first. "Thanks for the letter, Dad. I appreciate that you're trying. Let's grab dinner next time you're in Denver." Maya sent a text. "Got your letter. Some of it landed. Still processing. But I'm glad you're in therapy. Love you." Amara didn't respond for 3 weeks. When she finally called, her voice was thick with emotion. "I read your letter," she said. "I've read it probably 20 times. Jonathan, I can't give you what you want. I can't go back to who we were. I don't want to." "I know. But," she interrupted, "I can tell you that I see your effort. I see you showing up differently, being honest, doing the hard work. That matters. It doesn't fix the past, but it matters for the future, for our kids, for the people who benefit from your changed behavior, for you. I'm proud of you for finally dealing with your shit instead of running from it." My throat tightened. "That might be the kindest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it," she said, but I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm still furious with you on bad days. This isn't absolution, but it's acknowledgement. You broke something precious, and you're picking up the pieces even though they'll never fit back together the same way. That takes courage." We talked for another hour, the longest conversation we'd had since the divorce. We talked about Marcus's architecture firm landing a major project, about Maya's upcoming wedding, about the foundation's expansion plans. We talked like people who'd shared a life and were figuring out how to be in each other's orbits without destroying each other. When we hung up, I sat in my downtown Seattle apartment. I'd sold the Medina house and downsized significantly, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but maybe the early stages of peace. The kind that comes from accepting what you've done, facing the consequences, and choosing to be better anyway. I'm not going to pretend this story has a tidy ending. I'm 63 now, writing this in December, looking back at the most devastating and transformative year of my life. I'm still enormously wealthy, still privileged in ways most people will never experience. I still carry shame about what I did to Amara, about the 7 years of lies, about nearly throwing away relationships with my children. But I'm also different. I don't measure my worth by my net worth anymore. I don't equate vulnerability with weakness. I show up consistently for the people and causes I care about. Not because I'm trying to repair my reputation, but because it's who I want to be. Amara is thriving in ways that have nothing to do with me. She's traveling, she's dating. Marcus mentioned she's seeing someone, a professor at UW, and I'm genuinely happy for her. She deserves love and joy and a partner who shows up fully. She's expanding the foundation, writing a memoir about her career as a civil rights attorney, living the life she deferred for decades while being Mrs. Jonathan Pierce. My children are building their own families, their own legacies. I'm part of their lives, but not the center of them. That's appropriate. And me? I'm learning that redemption isn't a destination. It's a practice. It's showing up every day and choosing to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. It's funding scholarships for students I'll never meet. It's having hard conversations with my therapist about why I spent decades afraid of being known. It's teaching computer science to teenagers in Tacoma and remembering where I came from. It's being the kind of grandfather Marcus's daughter deserves, the kind of father Maya's future children deserve. I destroyed my marriage. I hurt people I loved. I squandered decades of trust for temporary escape. Those facts will never change, and I'll carry them for the rest of my life. But I'm also learning that people are more than their worst decisions. We're the sum of everything. The damage we've done and the repair we attempt, the ways we've failed and the ways we keep trying anyway. I thought this story would end with losing everything. Instead, it's about discovering what actually matters after you've lost the things you took for granted. It's about the difference between the life you build for appearances and the life you build when you finally stop running from yourself. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. I hope my mistakes can serve as someone else's warning. I hope my attempts at repair can show that transformation, however imperfect, is possible at any age. Love the people in your life while you have them. Tell the truth even when it's terrifying. Deal with your pain instead of medicating it with secrecy and betrayal. Show up, be present, be honest. I learned these lessons the hardest way possible. You don't have to. My name is Jonathan Pierce, and this is what happens when you finally stop running.